have a cistern in your backyard? I knew you would. Boy, with all the rain we've had lately, it should just be full. A lot of people do. People have those big barrel cisterns they keep in their backyard to collect water, to water their lawns or maybe their gardens, not to be dependent on just on city water. In rural areas, some people have huge cisterns for irrigation, for water for the livestock. In poorer countries, cisterns are often used, not only because of drought, but also for a better water source than something that might be otherwise available to them. In the ancient world, in ancient Israel, cisterns were a matter of life and death. They live, as you know, in this arid desert condition, and on many occasions, in fact, most occasions, they can go all summer long with not one drop of rain. And so they truly depended and still depend on cisterns to keep them alive, to keep their animals alive. It's also the case that with all those warring tribes, there were always foreign tribal armies coming into the land trying to overtake them, and they would go and close themselves up behind the walls of the city. But sometimes that siege could last for days or weeks, and the only water they had available to keep them alive when they were behind those walls was the water of cisterns. People dug cisterns out of bedrock. Imagine doing that. Some of them as much as 100 feet deep. Some of these cisterns so huge that they could hold 2 to 3 million gallons of water. Just around the temple area in Jerusalem, archaeologists have discovered 37 large cisterns. So when Jeremiah in this morning's Old Testament lesson uses cisterns as a metaphor, the people would fully have understood what he intended. He tells them, God has supplied you with so much over the course of your history. He has supplied you with living water, physically and metaphorically, running water, fresh water, the very best water, the kind of water that would keep you healthy, safe from drought of heart and soul, bubbling up with joy and hope within you. This is what God has done for you. He's given you this life-giving, abundant water for your souls. But instead, Jeremiah says, you have carved out your own cisterns, faulty, leaky cisterns that can't even hold stagnant water. He's saying to them that God Almighty, the creator of the world and the creator of Israel, all along has provided them with strength and purpose and love, but they have chosen over and over to carve out for themselves little gods, little statues that are no gods at all, have no power within them. And you have sought to find meaning and hope and joy that these things have no capacity for. These things, these cisterns that you've created, these little gods that are not God, they cannot provide you with the kind of joy and purpose and hope that you imagine. Carving out cisterns that cannot hold living water. In my hometown, growing up, I knew a young boy who lived in a nice enough home, very middle-class neighborhood. His parents both worked in respectable jobs, but they were not the kind of jobs that would produce wealth. Things were tight in their household. And each of the children, as they got into high school, they had to work to pay for their clothes, their books, and whatever else they needed or wanted. So they went to school during the day and they worked in the afternoons and evenings. And while they were a family of faith, that mother wanted more than anything for her children to have more prominence and affluence than she had had. She wanted her 3 children to be doctors. To be a doctor was to have wealth and prominence and respect. So that became the all-encompassing focus of their upbringing. Study hard. You better get those good grades through high school so you can get into a good college. You better keep those good grades in college so you can get into a good medical school. You better get into a good medical school so you can get into a prominent practice and make your mark as a doctor. Well, this young fellow had no interest in science or medicine no passion to be a doctor, to spend a large part of his young life pushing himself through all those hoops until he could be what his mother wanted him to be. But that was a driven, determined mother, and she pushed hard, and he let her. And after many years of hard work, he became a doctor. And he made a lot of money, and he has a lot of nice things, and he's well known in that community and respected. But I had supper with him some few years back, and there is no life left in him. He just seems so empty of joy and hope, and sadly, empty of faith. He carved out for himself a cistern that could not hold water, living water. I knew a woman who did a similar thing, only it wasn't about her vocation. It was about her many husbands. This beautiful woman, vivacious, life of the party, who went from husband to husband looking for something, I think, greater than the party. Always looking for something more that was never there. You know, a wealthier husband, a more prominent husband, a better looking husband, a more thoughtful, caring husband. I think she's on husband number 5 now. Carving out cisterns that cannot hold water. We all do it, don't we? We look for joy where joy can't be found. We look for life where there is only the pretense of life. What is it about us that prevents us from desiring and finding the real life that can only be found in God? I suppose at some level it goes back to the story of Adam and Eve, humanity's pride, our determination to have our own way, to control our own lives, our resistance to the goodness and the guidance of God. Like that teenager who always thinks that he knows better than the parent. And on top of that reality, we live in a world that is overflowing with all kinds of allurements that are thrown in front of our face every day through television and advertising and social media and celebrity culture, convincing us that happiness and meaning can be found in money and popularity and power. And yet it seems that so many of the hatreds and divisions and destruction that we find in this world come from power and popularity and money. We go to war with another country over issues of power and economics. We learn to hate other groups of people because of power and money. We want our group, whether ethnic, political, or religious, to have the upper hand, to have the power and the money. And what does all that even matter at the end of it all? What does all that even matter in the greater scope of life and death and God? How many wealthy, powerful people have I known who at the end of life just seem so empty? I'd love to say that at least the religious people in the world are free of all that nonsense. But we know that's not the case. Not even in Jesus' day. So hang in here with me because I'm making a leap from Jeremiah to Luke. In this morning's gospel lesson, Jesus goes to a dinner party on the Sabbath at the home of a prominent Pharisee. And he notices how the more prominent guests choose the best seats at the head of the table, just assuming that they, of course, would be the natural ones to sit at the head of the table. It's like when my uncle used to come for Christmas dinner, and he would always assume that he sits at the head, even though it's my father's house, you know? Just assuming that, of course, I should be at the head of the table. This is the gospel of Christ, for heaven's sake. I mean, why are they even talking to us about a dinner party? Why is the gospel writer putting this in front of us? A dinner party, who sits where, you know, in the first century? Who cares? You know, surely this is superfluous to the larger purposes of the gospel. Or perhaps it is another of the dozens of examples of Jesus using everyday realities to point up eternal truths. These religious people, the Pharisees, these who proclaim themselves not only to be lovers of God, but those who best keep the faithful laws of God, are so full of their own self-importance, their own sense of standing, that they're jockeying for the better seats. It's helpful, I think, to remember that this is from St. Luke's Gospel. Luke was the only Gentile. Matthew, Mark, and John were Jews. So you find throughout Luke's Gospel that he makes a point over and over of including stories that underscore God's love for all people, not just the religious people. Luke is the one, you remember, who wants to make sure we see the shepherds at the birth of Jesus. The shepherds, these lowly, common people in that society. They were on the lowest rung of the ladder. These dirty, nasty little shepherds, you know. He wasn't concerned like Matthew to make sure we see that the great kings from the Orient come. He wants us to see the shepherds were included. Luke is the one who gives us chapter 15. That tells us the story of the lost coin and the lost sheep and the lost prodigal son. Those stories are all about God's love for those who are outside of the community. And it is Luke who gives us the book of Acts that shows how God's love spreads beyond Israel to the whole of the Gentile world. A much bigger thing than the religious people imagined. Now, before we get to this dinner party that we just read about in chapter 14 of Luke, I always think it's good. If you're reading the Bible, you're in the Old Testament or the New Testament, you're reading a little passage, do bookends. Read what's on the left side of it, on the right side of it, because that gives you the context. And whoever wrote it wants you to understand it in that context. So before we get to the dinner party, in chapter 13, the stage is set, as it shows us Jesus criticizing the religious people for being like a fig tree that has been carefully, lovingly planted by its owner, but never shows forth good fruit. Sitting there year after year in the vineyard, all kinds of love and care, water, fertilizer, putting forth nothing good. He proclaims in that same chapter that these religious people need to realize that it's a narrow door that leads to true faithfulness. And they might discover that they are not actually the ones who are walking the narrow way, even though they think they are. He says the first will be last, the last will be first. And then on the other bookend, just beyond the dinner party, he tells them about this great banquet given by the owner of the household and how the religious people are making all kinds of excuses why they can't come. Oh, we want to be there, but we've got this other party we got to go to. And so he says the doors are being thrown wide open, that they'll go by the sides of the roads and invite anybody and everybody to come, the blind, the lame, the crippled, the poor. And we realize that our little dinner party is about much more than a dinner party. It's about the eternal banquet of God's restorative grace, where all are welcome and none have privilege over another. Where all are welcome and none have privilege over another. And perhaps it is the case that God's words through Jeremiah, those words about how the religious people have carved out for themselves cisterns that cannot hold water, that those words find their most devastating consequence in the Pharisees of Jesus' day, who have made the religion of God's own people yet another carved out cistern that can hold no water. They have taken the gift of God's love and grace in the law and made it into yet another kind of idol. Religious people using what had been intended for good purposes as yet another false idol that just lifts up their pride, lifts up their own sense of privilege, and shuts the door on God's all-encompassing love. Could it be that not only do we seek to find joy and peace and purpose in those things that cannot provide joy, peace, and purpose, but that we have also taken the gift of God's love that provides the possibility of joy and peace and purpose, and have shaped it in such a way that it too has become a dead idol that simply enthrones our own egos? Does the gospel of Jesus have much power anymore in the culture in which we live? Or has the church so choked the power out of it that it's just an empty idol? If God's life-giving water is flowing through the person of Jesus, and His church has put such constrictions on how that water can be accessed or experienced, have we not then become just like the Pharisees of Jesus' day, controlling God's grace for our own purposes, building walls instead of bridges? That first story I shared at the beginning of the sermon about the mother who pushed her son into becoming a doctor such that his vocation became an idol with no life-giving purpose. What hope can the church offer someone like him if we're doing the very same thing in our communication of the grace of Christ? If it too has been made into another form of achievement, another thing that can be obtained if we work hard enough, if we understand the creeds, if we act out the appropriate behaviors, then have we not carved out another empty cistern that cannot hold water? Have we not made Jesus into an idol that serves our own egos and not the redemptive love of God? Making Jesus a matter of personal privilege and power rather than a vessel of life-giving love? The Jews took the law, which God had given them, as a way to understand holiness and dependence on God, and they turned it into something that was about dependence on themselves and their own privilege. Have we done the same with the gift of God's grace in Christ?